the more inappropriate the laugh could possibly be for the situation, the more likely I am to just burst right up into it.
Yeah, I do the same
I hope
thing.
no one gets offended by that, you guys.
Welcome to A Century in Cinema. I'm Arthur.
And I'm Andrew.
And this is a podcast where we discuss a classic film from every year. Today's film is from 1938, The Adventures of Robin Hood, directed by Michael Curtiz and William Cayley, starring Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland. Where'd you watch The Adventures of Robin Hood?
I watched The Adventures of Robin Hood on HBO Max.
You can always check the show notes to see where it is streaming if you are not listening in January of 2021. So we're in the year 1938. Time magazine names Adolf Hitler the most influential man of the year.
Phew.
So under his complete control now, Germany has grown more and more warlike and oppressive. Nazi Germany goes unchallenged, persecuting its own Jewish population, annexing Austria this year, and tensions with other neighboring countries are escalating. Now, nobody wants a second world war to break out, and British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously appeals to Hitler's demands to occupy a region of Czechoslovakia. Returning home to Britain, Chamberlain declares that we will have peace in our time. All right, in other news, U.S. unemployment still high, higher than it was last year, actually. The Dust Bowl is still a thing. There's the war between Japan and China, the Spanish Civil War. All of that is still going on as well. So something I've failed to mention, I'm sure I've failed to mention a lot of things, actually. But throughout the decade and leading up to this year, physicists have been tinkering with radioactivity and atomic energy. Enrico Fermi is usually the name associated with nuclear fission's discovery this year. But I understand a lot of people were involved, including Albert Einstein earlier. And a lot of these scientists were and are working in Germany at the time. But throughout the decade, they flee the Nazi dictatorship and they keep working on their data elsewhere. And that'll become very important in the coming years. In popular culture, this is the year of the very first Superman comic. At the top of the box office this year is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which is credited as the first feature-length animated film, coming from Disney, of course. And Orson Welles has his radio broadcast of The War of the Worlds, based on the H.G. Wells novel this year. Newspapers at the time said that there was mass panic following the broadcast, but okay, every time I look into this story, there's a disclaimer that these reports were almost certainly exaggerated and just not true, especially since newspapers at the time had an interest in discrediting the emerging radio technology that was clawing away more and more of their ad revenue at the time.
Right.
But it makes for a better story to think that everyone just went crazy when they listened to this thing.
This was the year before Gone with the Wind came out, which was a huge production this year. A lot of actresses were vying for the role of Scarlet. One who vied the hardest was Bette Davis, who didn't even get considered for the role. And in sort of an outrage almost, the studio that Bette Davis belonged to did a sort of off-brand Dollar Tree version of Gone with the Wind, directed by William Wyler, called Jezebel. And it's a fun movie, but it is really funny because literally the entire thing is written just so Bette Davis can play like a Scarlett O'Hara type. But as we know, 1939 is right around the corner, which is considered by many to be the golden year of cinema. All of those films are currently in production. And so a lot of big budgets, a lot of experimenting with color, a lot of studios taking big risks on new actors, and we're going to have a lot of fun talking about that.
Absolutely. In 1939, a huge year for the world at large as the Second World War officially breaks out. So that's 1938, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the adventures of Robin Hood.
Whose turn is it for synopsis?
I don't know. Do you want me? I think here. I think it's honestly okay to just read the letterbox description. It's Robin Hood. It's the story of Robin Hood. Robin Hood fights nobly for justice against the evil Sir Guy of Gisborne while striving to win the hand of the beautiful Maid Marian. He's trying to return King Richard to his rightful place on the throne because he's been usurped by Prince John. And Robin Hood and his band of merry men wage a guerrilla war to take from the rich and give to the poor. You know this story,
This movie's definitely not trying to reinvent the wheel of Robin Hood in any way. It's a very faithful retelling of the story.
And I'll be honest, I don't know the original story of Robin Hood, but through cultural osmosis, I think I do. And I think that is because of this film. This film is the Robin Hood we know, right?
Is this just a folk tale or is there a book? Because this was my first time watching this one. And I've seen many other adaptations. It just sort of really cemented for me moments that have to be either in the original ballad or original folk tale or original book or whatever. For instance, him fighting against Little John on the log, that's in every single Robin Hood. Going to the arrow competition, that's in every single Robin Hood. I feel like every Robin Hood adaptation has different little moments here and there, but there are these certain story beats that are in every single one of them. And that was kind of fun to watch this and be okay.
And yeah, apparently Robin Hood is based on ballads, tales, folklore, various pieces of literature, poems, all sorts of stuff. It doesn't seem like there's a canonical Robin Hood that is a book or anything like that.
He's always just been a fictional character, or
I don't think he's a fictional character. I think he's based on a real person in some sort of event that was happening at the time. But, I did no research on that, to be honest.
Yeah, me neither.
And I don't know if that's what really interested me about this film, comparing it to its source material, because it does feel like the source material is just all over the place.
Yeah. It's so funny. You've seen Robin Hood Men in Tights?
This is the only Robin Hood film I've actually seen.
You're lying. How is that possible?
I know the story, but I've never seen him.
You...
No, the Disney one? No.
This was a really fun movie.
Yeah, I really liked this film.
Yeah, it was a good time.
But this is the kind of swashbuckling nonsense that, you just want to eat popcorn and sit down on Friday night with.
Yeah, the scene where Robin Hood was in the dining hall and the big sword fight happens, I literally out loud said, "Oh wow, this is a swashbuckling adventure. We're on a little journey." Yeah, it was just nice. It's a little adventure movie.
It's funny. I thought the exact same thing, because when you think of the swashbuckling genre, you think of that madman waving his sword around and dancing against this mass of people and shooting arrows and all this fun stuff against this score that's just going crazy. Yeah, this embodies the genre, right? You can see why people love it.
Kind of sets the precedent with it being in color and everything. I mean, truly, all the bright colors and big sets are a huge staple of that genre.
Oh, yeah. The only other film comparable that we've watched in our list is The Thief of Baghdad in 1925, which has elements of it, but man, the pacing in that is so slow and it just takes forever that you never feel like you're having fun. You feel like you're watching a piece of history. This felt like a film where I was actually having fun. I liked this.
Yeah, and every single moment just seemed to flow really naturally, and the story never loses any of its momentum.
Great, so we both liked this film. We can go home? We got this?
Yeah, we can that's actually the podcast for today. So this film actually has two directors, Michael Curtiz and William Cayley. William Cayley, even though he had directed some film beforehand, was actually more known for his theater direction and his work on Broadway. Michael Curtiz is a very famous Hollywood director, most famously known for Casablanca.
Oh, cool.
Did you feel like you were watching two different directing styles at any point where you were watching this film?
No, I didn't. And you always send me these little talking points and things to kind of consider. And I didn't even know this was directed by two different people. I wasn't looking out for it or anything when I watched the film. But did you?
No, I didn't. I actually thought that it worked together really well. I thought that the costumes and the staging and the way, especially the fight scenes, were blocked, that there was like a very theatrical flair to everything. But the movie itself was filmed very beautifully. There were so many cool film effects, so many cool matte paintings and half sets coming out of, composites and stuff. And there was a lot of like really subtle visual trickery in there. I felt like those two styles came together really well. But this film, yeah, I love the way everything looks and everything pops. Do you know how much of this was location versus set?
It seems like quite a bit of it was, obviously set, but they were filming out in California forests for a lot of it. They were actually filming in a forest called the Sherwood Forest because it had been renamed after they shot the 1922 Douglas Fairbanks Robin Hood there.
Wow, that's so nice.
That's cute, yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't tell what was a set and what wasn't during parts of it because it all looked so well lit and so stagey. And also, if you've ever seen a Douglas Sirk film, such as Written on the Wind, where the whole thing is sets, and it just blows your mind what you're looking at, especially of thinking of the forest scenes with the river going between it and stuff. I mean, there's fully this set in Written on the Wind there's like a lake in a forest, and it's insane to watch. And so while I was watching it, I was thinking, was this a set? Were they just that good back then?
I mean, it does blend together really well.
Seamlessly, yeah.
Obviously, the interior of the castles and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah, why would you use a location for that?
There are no castles in California. Yeah, did you know James Cagney was originally being tapped to play Robin Hood?
I had no idea.
Can you imagine that little gangster guy in this role?
That would have been a very interesting film.
That would have been a very different film, yeah. And this film cost $2 million to produce. It was actually one of the most expensive films Warner Brothers had made at the time because they were usually doing the gangster films like the James Cagney things that we were watching earlier. But yeah, like you said, studios were there to take risks this year, and this was a risk for them. They put a lot of money into this, but it paid off handsomely. It ended up making around $4 million, so twice as much money. It was number... Six in the box office that year? Yeah.
Arthur, this is the first film we've watched in color since we started doing this series.
Oh boy, is it ever. It's so colorful. Rich and vibrant. Colors everywhere.
Yeah, every single time a new costume was on screen, it felt like they were trying to really test the limits of just how bright any color could possibly look in film.
Yeah, his green tunic definitely stands out.
Yeah, well, I guess he wore the black hood during his little incognito sequence, but outside of that, they really never let him change costumes.
Which is smart. That green tunic and that hat and the feather and everything is just iconic.
Let's call it what it is. Yeah.
Was this even the Robin Hood look before this film? I don't know.
It definitely is afterwards.
Yeah. Did we notice anything that stood out particularly? Like everything. Everything stands out.
Yeah, it definitely felt like the color blocking especially seemed to be, I would describe it as reckless abandon.
That's about right. Yeah.
I don't mean that in any sort of negative way. You've never seen Last Year at Marienbad?
No.
So whenever I think of black and white to color, that movie sort of comes to mind because there are these phenomenal pictures of the location that movie was set in, and all of the photographs are in color, even though the movie itself is in black and white. And when you look at the different layers and depths of color in the sets and the design of that film and how it translates to black and white, it's really cool because it shows, there are different levels of black and white you can achieve using different colors.
Yeah.
That was what was sticking out to me with Robin Hood, was that, probably a lot of costumes looked like that during black and white movies because you wanted different colors so the black and white could pop out a little bit more.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then in this movie, because it's in color, I mean, some of these designs and patterns and combinations just are so out there and wacky and wild. It somehow just makes complete sense. I think it's during the arrow sequence, Olivia de Havilland is wearing this this like vertical stripe gown.
All of her costumes are great.
Every time she walked on set, it was a gasp from me. When she first walked in and they were plotting against King Richard coming down the stairway in the background of that shot, I was like, oh my gosh, I already love this costume and it's not even in focus yet. And then again, it's just like the colors are clashing almost, but it just looks so extravagant. And shout out to Milo Anderson, who just killed it on these costumes.
It definitely makes you wonder what a lot of these black and white films that we've watched really did look like, because in my mind, they are just black and white. And there's a nice artistry to that.
Yeah.
But you miss the whole color spectrum. You can do so much with it. This movie would be much less thrilling if it was in black and white. It'd still be good, but so much of the fun of it is just the crazy spectrum of colors they have going on.
Yes, I would agree.
And they know that. I mean, this is one of the first full feature-length films in color, so they're bragging about it. They're going all out.
I can imagine being completely gagged by this as an audience member in the 30s. Just completely shocked by the colors and everything on screen. I mean, it still pops so beautifully today.
So do you know much about the technical process of actually producing color film?
I'm assuming you mean the Technicolor film stock?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's correct me if I'm wrong. It's a red film strip, a green film strip, and a blue film strip all on top of each other.
Like, this is the reason why color film is still pretty rare, like even into the 70s. Right? People are still making a lot of black and white films for the coming decades, is because the cameras have to run 3 strips of film through them. They're huge things.
Yeah.
And you can look at pictures of them and they're bulky and massive. And apparently, in order to minimize the sound coming off of these machines, they had to wrap them in even more machines. There was this thing called the blimp that they had to box up the camera in. And when you put the whole contraption together, it weighed apparently like 400 to 500 pounds, just so you could capture sound on set without this thing whirring away in the background. So you can see why they were only being used on these enormous Hollywood productions. The crew, in order to just maintain the color camera being used in this film, is insane.
Did you know an IMAX camera weighs like 250 pounds?
I mean, I knew they were massive, yes.
Hoytema, the guy who did the cinematography for Interstellar, during Interstellar was fully picking up IMAX cameras to get like close-ups and to use them throughout sets, and was fully like holding them on his shoulder.
Like what? Like what?
that's completely real. But when you said how heavy the color camera set must have been, I'm like, I bet Hoytema could find a way to lug it on his shoulder and get his gorilla shots if he needs to.
But yeah, apparently Technicolor, the company behind this 3-strip dye process, would send their whole team to each production that was shooting in Technicolor, because it was this enormous operation to process things in color. And not only were they there to, help run the camera and that kind of stuff, but they were there to make decisions with the set design department and the costume people to say what would look best with the process. So you can see why, when you see these old films from the 30s, 40s, 50s, when it says proudly at the beginning, color by Technicolor, like, they were very proud of that. And they should be. Like, it looks beautiful.
Yeah, it's incredible how well it's held up and how good it looks today.
Have you seen any of the 2-color process that Technicolor was doing before they settled on this process?
What are some examples?
So the first one was from 1917, The Gulf Between. They have another from 1922, Toil of the Sea. It actually has Anna May Wong in it.
Oh, of course. I've seen 1925, Phantom of the Opera. Great film. And there's like a scene in color. And I guess that was done with the 2-color process.
The 2-color process was recorded onto one film strip, and then that was like torn apart, and then they were dyed separately and then glued back together. It was a whole mess. And you can look up footage from these old 2-color process films, and they look so strange without the blue color tint in them. So they're trying to expose for the red in people's faces and the green in foliage, but the sky looks brown. The water looks gray. It's so strange looking. I just don't think there are that many because the whole process was kind of a mess. And apparently there were technical issues when you were trying to screen these things. The projectionist couldn't quite get the lenses right because that was a part of it. And then the film stock would sometimes like warp and buckle because it was glued together. In 1926, The Black Pirate, starring Douglas Fairbanks, they actually had to send back a lot of the film stock that had been sent to theaters around the country because you couldn't play it anymore. So actually, for a while, Technicolor was sort of humiliated by this whole process until they came up with the 3-color film that we see here.
Wow, that's crazy.
I actually wanted to point out that the color film that we see here is easy to preserve. Like, what we are watching is very, very close to what audiences were watching at the time, because the Technicolor process was just incredibly high quality and so good. Eventually, once color film becomes a little bit more accessible, there are cheaper ways to produce it, but they deteriorate. They have a faded look over time, stuff like that. That's where we get like, the vintage look that people think is cool. But this Technicolor process holds up. And what we see in The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, Robin Hood is basically what audiences were seeing in the theaters back when these films came out. It's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Compared to the 2-color process, which the green dye apparently would fade over time. So there's actually more of an orange-red tint to those 2-color films because you just can't preserve them nearly as well. I mean, I do want to point out how it feels like throughout film history, we see these sort of turning points where these big technical changes happen in the industry. So now we have 48 frames per second, I think, is the most recent example, right?
Yeah.
The same way that we're kind of like, 48 frames, that's a gimmick. Or doesn't it look strange when you're watching The Hobbit, how it looks like there are people on sets? Doesn't that kind of ruin the magic of it? Did people feel that way back then? I'm curious if audiences thought that this kind of ruined the magic of it.
That is an interesting thought. I always think of that part in Singing in the Rain when they're talking about talkies and the two like artistic people who have like the ridiculous clothing are like, it's vulgar when talking about sound being in movies.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea what audience reception was like at the time. I mean, this movie was praised for its imagery and colors. But at this point, I mean, color had been around for a little bit.
Oh. The New York Times review of Becky Sharp, which was a 1935 film. Becky Sharp was credited as the first film using the 3-color process from Technicolor. This New York Times review just lavishes praise on it. I mean, it's got to be that audiences love this stuff because studios kept using it versus like 48 frames per second, which no one touched after The Hobbit, and 3D, which seems to have sort of like piddled out. But I mean, audiences clearly didn't latch on to those. There are these technical things that are trying to be put into films that audiences just don't gravitate towards. And I think pretty clearly they gravitated towards this.
I was just going to say 3D, they've been trying to get that going since the 20s.
Yeah, it's true. There's always some weird version of it. You're right. But I mean, this review mentions that the screenplay for Becky Sharp is garbage. They really don't like the story, but they are just so impressed with the look and vibrant colors of the film that they are happy to overlook that. They do mention some technical things that I think are interesting. So the process of dyeing film in color actually softens it up a little bit. Mm-hmm. So black and white films still have that like crisp, sharp feel. Color films have a little bit of a softer look. And they mentioned that in wider shots, a lot of distant faces just seem like blurs. You can't see them. They also mentioned something that I didn't notice, the reds after a shot change. And I don't know if that was just like the film stock running through the projector at the time or something like that. But yeah, that if the reds are particularly sharp, they have like an after image that sticks around.
I really love this quote. The major problem from the spectator's point of view is the necessity for accustoming the eye to this new screen element in much the same way that we were obliged to accustom the ear to the first talkies. The psychological problem is to reduce this new and spectacular element to a position, in relation to the film as a whole, where color will impinge no more violently upon the basic photographic image than sound does today. So they were comparing it to it right there.
Yeah, well put. Yeah, so obviously studios try to recapture this lightning in a bottle that they had with talkies and color film, again with all sorts of stuff, 3D, CinemaScope, you name it.
Have you ever read anything about that study where people would dream in black and white until television sets were in color?
I've heard of that. I almost feel like it's an old wives' tale.
Hold. I have the links. This is a rabbit hole, though. There is debate. Pretty much what it's saying is that before television, people would dream in color. And then when black and white TV became common, people would dream in black and white. And then when TV became color, people would dream in color. I think it's interesting.
Like, I could believe it.
I have so many dreams that feel so cinematic in the way they're like presented and the way they look that, yeah, I know they're being influenced by films and images.
Did people dream in prose before there was any film stock?
The first dreams were just the sounds of rocks hitting against each other. Anyone who's ever worked on like a headset at a fast food restaurant and then had the dream where like the beeping in the ear just keeps going on the rest of the night. That's what the cavemen dealt with.
Moving on to our review of Robin Hood, right. I feel like that's a fine transition.
A good segue.
This review is from Variety. It's very short. They just quickly mentioned that the film is excellent. They really like it. They do mention that one of the directors, Kaylee, was incapacitated by illness, and then Curtis took over the production. I couldn't find anything else about that, but it would be interesting to know what the involvement was exactly between those two. Nonetheless, it's seamless, and this review mentions that there is skillful blending of their joint work.
It also, just at the end, sort of says that it won Best Interior Decoration, which is now Best Art Direction. These huge staircases and all of the architecture, it all lends itself to this different world that still feels somehow like it could be in our world.
With an air of fantasy, for sure, but medieval.
Yeah, but with fantastical elements. Yeah, it's really fascinating to look at.
Oh, didn't you love the shot when they're sword fighting at the end and they go off screen and we see their shadows against the pillar?
Oh my gosh, yes, when they come past the camera and then the huge shadow play on the wall.
Oh, so cool, yeah.
Very, very cool. I loved that. I loved that entire third act. I thought that was so great. The most impressive shot to me when I was watching it, the one that just struck me, was when Robin Hood was climbing up the wall to get to Maid Marian's windowsill. And the perspective is like a bird's eye view looking down on him. And the right side of the frame is a matte painting. And then he's just on this tiny little vine. So you can tell the set itself is like maybe 2 or 3 feet tall. But the blending of it is so seamless that it really does look like he's on the top of this huge castle wall. That effect really struck me.
And this film also won the Academy Award for editing. I'm curious if visual effects are incorporated into that, for sure. This film also won at the Academy Awards for original score. And I just want to make a quick note because the composer was a well-known and highly regarded classic composer from Vienna, Erich Wolfgang Korngold. So he wasn't used to working in film. He was from a traditional opera orchestra background. And you get the big symphonies, the big orchestrations and everything. And his style would go on to directly influence the sound of the golden age of Hollywood, right, in the 50s, these big adventurous scores. And eventually John Williams cites Korngold in his work for Star Wars and Indiana Jones. And you can definitely hear it here.
Absolutely.
Like, it sounds like a John Williams score. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So this is interesting. Korngold was working in LA during the production of this film. And he's originally from Vienna, Austria. And the Germans actually invaded his home. during the production of this film, and he stayed in America until the end of the war in order to avoid their persecution.
Damn. That's crazy.
Credits this film with saving his life.
Oh my gosh, that's a pretty crazy tidbit. Yeah, I just feel like this entire film is a bunch of artists who are right at the edge of, you know, peaking, and they all go on to make projects that are a little more famous than this one and have a little more acclaim than this one. But this film was just this combination of a bunch of talents. I mean, this was also a huge launching point for Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland. They were both established actors. I mean, they'd already been in 2 films together before this, but Errol Flynn would go on to be, you know, a pretty big action star, and Olivia de Havilland would eventually do The Heiress, which is one of the finest performances ever committed to film, in my opinion. And I think they did a total of like 8 or 9 films together.
Always playing the romantic leads?
Yes.
Oh. Well, they have chemistry. They work together.
Yeah, they have really, really good chemistry. And yeah, you know, this movie sort of really launched them into stardom in a big way. And they both, I mean, because they both had careers before this movie, but it really wasn't until after this one that they were in really high demand.
And Errol Flynn's having such a good time with it. Like, he's just waging this guerrilla war and just having a grand merry time.
Australian excellence, Errol Flynn.
Always smiling, always laughing, just making jokes with people, messing around.
Yeah, he's got a very easygoing charisma to him that feels very effortless and really natural. And you can definitely see why a bunch of people would band around him to achieve a goal and why they are so attracted to him.
He goes into the archery tournament knowing it's a trap. He's just playing around. Totally just admits that he's in disguise right in front of the bad guys and everything.
Right.
No plan. And then just starts punching them and then gets caught.
Well, speaking of plans, I thought that the setup for Maid Marian to go in and be like, hey, everyone, I have this plan and we're going to execute it together. And then they execute it. And I was like, oh, they couldn't figure that out themselves. Like, I don't know. It was just such a basic plan. Like, we're just going to shoot the guys who are about to hang him and then get him down. Like, I don't know. That was really funny to me that they did that huge setup and had her. And I understood it from a character perspective. Obviously, you know, the merry men are accepting her and they're like learning to trust her. I just thought it was really funny that she's like, oh, I stayed up all night making this plan. And it's like, you're going to shoot these 2 guys and then get him down. I don't know. It was really funny to me.
At the beginning, Robin Hood just dances into the dining hall, munching on food and whatever, and then just tells the new king that he sucks, and then just, like, again, shoves his way out. But there was no, like, cleverness there. He just went in without a plan.
The cleverness was, you know, him telling the guards at the door that a traitor was trying to escape.
Oh, that was clever. That
was really funny. And they're having to push against the door. You know, I've put down talking about how this adaptation compares to other adaptations of Robin Hood, but I truly wasn't expecting to go into this having been the only one who's ever seen another Robin Hood. That was not in the plan.
No, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It just really is so shocking to me because it's like one of those films that's been remade a million times, and I feel like everybody had one that they loved when they were a kid.
Yeah.
For me, actually, it wasn't even the Disney film. It was the 1991 Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with the infamous Kevin Costner performance where he doesn't do a British accent. But Alan Rickman plays the Sheriff of Nottingham in that adaptation. It is a tour de force. I'm not kidding. He is so charismatic and you are rooting for that villain because he gets all the best lines. He makes all the best jokes and everything about him you just sort of really love. And then Robin Hood Men in Tights is really interesting to me now, having watched this, because the plot for Robin Hood Men in Tights is a direct parody of the 91 film. Cary Elwes plays Robin Hood and even directly says, well, unlike some Robin Hoods, I have a British accent. But all of the costume design and all of the set design for it, which feel very specific, never looked anything like the 91 film. And now that I've seen this one, I realize, oh, they got all the aesthetics and all of the costume ideas from the 38 film and then ripped off the plot of the 91 film. It's a really good mishmash. And then, of course, the Disney film is fantastic.
And then, of course, there's the Russell Crowe Robin Hood.
Nobody's seen that. None of our listeners even know what that movie is. There was also a really recent one with Jamie Foxx in it that literally no one saw.
Oh, there was. Oh, my God.
Like, the further we get into time when a Robin Hood comes out, the more likely it is nobody will ever watch it.
Is Robin Hood and this story still relevant?
The politics of this film are really interesting because if you look at it just, from the base of what everyone calls Robin Hood, taking from the rich and giving to the poor.
That's what I've always heard it was, yeah.
But this film specifically is so married to the idea of King Richard being this good all going to end wealth inequality ideal that, I don't mean to be pessimistic, but does not exist, that person who's like got a high establishment of power, a large set of wealth, and then is also like going out to purposefully end wealth inequality. They haven't shown up yet, and it seems unlikely that that's how things work in the world.
I mean, is that what the people thought of someone like FDR at the time? Can that tie into this?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I mean, I think that everyone has a certain amount of hope that something like that will happen. And I'm not faulting the movie for that perspective either, because it's an adventure film with an optimistic angle, and you have to give them something to root for and a goal to have. And, his goal is to reestablish King Richard because he was better to the common man than Prince John is.
Yeah, I didn't think too hard about the politics of this film as I was watching it. There are a couple things that stood out to me, but, broad strokes, like it is just a big platitude. Just, he's trying to get the most benevolent leader back on the throne, the person who is going to unite the people and not literally kill them on the streets. So...
But he's also still coming out in full-fledged support of a monarchy.
Yeah, but it's not like Robin Hood's going to be like a pro-democracy kind of guy in, what is it, 1100 AD?
It is a question of why Robin Hood is no longer a successful franchise in any real way.
It's too idealistic, maybe?
Maybe, and I don't want to sound too cynical, but he doesn't have superpowers.
You might be right.
Yeah, I think these days the crusader who we look up to and we want to see in our movies has to be somebody who has otherworldly powers. Otherwise, there's not enough for us to escape into.
I was also going to say like an anti-hero, someone with some shades of gray, because Robin Hood is just so noble and pure that it's almost uninteresting unless you have someone like Errol Flynn just playing him so well.
Yeah, and it's weird because I feel like there is an ability to do something like that with that character.
But should you?
Maybe that's what they tried in the 2010 version, and that's why nobody saw it. And again, it's like we're also at this really strange point where everybody has grown up with a Robin Hood they fell in love with, except for you, Arthur. And with that being something that's like a nostalgic property, especially with the 2018 film, which was really advertising itself to be something that was going to be a little edgy and hardcore, it's like nobody really wants to see that. When it comes to the story of Robin Hood, everyone already has a movie that they would rather watch. And I think that's interesting too.
The thing that stood out to me about the politics of this, and again, I wasn't really thinking about it as I watched it. It is kind of a kids film, adventure film. Like it's not something I'm really trying to dissect and analyze. Was just the obsession with being taxed and how taxes are bad. I can see someone getting really into that and just being, hoorah, I'm going to be Robin Hood because I feel like I'm being taxed a little bit too much by these evil government officials.
Yeah, it's, he believes in a percentage tax versus a baseline tax. Or is it the other way around? I'm not going to put my perspective on taxes on this podcast.
You know what? I'm not either. Let's just not.
But taxing is theft.
Really, Robin Hood is a radical terrorist libertarian, and he should be seen as such.
It's completely true. I mean, he's a domestic terrorist, but we love him. You know, a domestic terrorist that focuses on the rich.
All right, we should wrap this up. Final thoughts on the movie, Andrew?
Yeah, it's just the whole movie has that vibe of it just feels like a bunch of really accomplished artists are all working together to achieve something really monumentous, and it feels like they really succeeded for the most part.
I mean, this is an incredibly famous film. I was actually talking to my dad. He said he watched it all the time as a kid, 50s, 60s. I mean, it was still really popular later on, too. It totally eclipses the 1922 Fairbanks Robin Hood. And then, of course, the swashbuckling nature goes on to influence Star Wars and that kind of thing. You can see the influence there, right? With the prologue at the beginning and the daring escapes. And, I mean, the sword fighting, right? That looks like lightsaber fighting.
Yeah, with the way they're circling it around their heads and stuff.
Oh, yeah, it's so cool.
It's funny, my friend Catherine, who does listen to this, so shout out to you, Catherine, she recommended this film to me when we were in high school together. She always told me this is like one of her favorite movies, and I never watched it. But now that I've watched it, I totally get it.
Well, next week we're watching a Frank Capra film, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. That film is available to rent online, and as always, you can check our show notes to see where it is streaming. I just want to give a shout out to all our Patreon members who keep the show running. Thank you all. You too can become a patron and get access to bonus episodes linked down in the show notes. You're listening on YouTube now, so like and subscribe and comment down below. Tell us if you've seen the film. What did you think of it? Did we miss anything? Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you for the next one.